right, are we okay, Lana, to go?
Yes, you're good to go. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, we'll call the meeting to order. And I'll note that Councillor Simpson sends regrets for tonight. And the first order of business is 1-1. Are there any items on today's agenda that give rise to pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? I don't see any indication of same, so the record will note no conflict arises. We have the agenda before us, item 2.1. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda if there are no additions. Councillor Avery moves. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, and that's all 6 of us in favor. Myself, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Lloyd, and Councillor Avery. Then we'll go to item 3.1, the regular council meeting minutes of February 22nd, 2021. Are there any errors or omissions, deletions, additions?
Move to approve as presented.
Okay, Councillor Holm moves the adoption of the minutes as circulated. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. Myself, Councillor Holm, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Lloyd, and Councillor Avery. And then we go on to item 4.1, the Mountain Bike Design Working Group, and that'll be led by Spencer Croyle. Welcome,
Thank
Spencer.
you, Mayor Craig. Sorry about that. Thank you, and welcome, and good evening to you and Council. Just as a quick sound check, everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. You never quite know these days, so I always do like to check. Okay, so very briefly, we do have an update for Council on the mountain bike park engagement portion of that project. So as Council is likely aware, we opened a brief survey for the community on February 17th on our new engagement platform. And that was open until March 5th at the end of the day. So as of the end of that part of the engagement strategy, 71 responses have been received. With an age split almost exactly down the middle between those 35 and under and those 35 and over. And there were a number of youth participants that provided feedback, which was good to see. About 3/4 of those individuals who responded to the survey had experience mountain biking, and that means about 1/4 did not. Of the 3/4 that did have experience, their most relevant experience has been in parks around Southern Alberta, which is good considering we would probably designed for the same type of climate and riding conditions as we find in the Lethbridge area. We also had 45 unique comments shared through the survey, all of which have been helpful and productive, and I would say echo a sense of excitement around the project. 19 individuals of the 71 who responded have indicated they're interested in being a part of the working group that we hope to launch next week, and 8 of those are under the age of 18, which is good in this case, especially given that it's an amenity that's going to serve a broad range of ages and abilities and participants. So that's exciting to see. And with that, I don't have much else to add at this time, but I will note that the names and backgrounds of the participants who do wish to be considered for the working group are a part of the closed portion of this evening's meeting. So at this time, I would just ask for acceptance of the update as information for Council, and then to move on to the working group portion later on in the evening. And that's all I have. So if there are any questions, I'm of course happy to answer all of those. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open the floor to questions of Spencer, if there are any. If there are none, then the motion to receive for information would be Councillor Chapman moves the report for information. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Okay, that's all 6. Councillor Avery, Councillor Lloyd, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Holm, and myself. Thank you, Spencer. And then we'll move on to 7.1, and that's your item as well. So away you go.
Well, thank you again, Mayor. So the item to be discussed is road closure bylaw 793-P-11-20. The report included in this evening's agenda has a substantial amount of background that would have been presented at the regular meeting of November 23rd. That was the meeting at which Council passed the bylaw for first reading. After that, there are a number of steps involved with a road closure bylaw where the roads are under the stewardship of a municipality under 10,000, but still under the ownership technically of the province. So in this case, we've had to have the Minister of Transportation sign off on the bylaw. Prior to that, we had to have a public hearing, which we held December 14th, and we circulated all surrounding property owners. So at this time, it really becomes an administrative matter. We have the signature from the minister. The package of information has been accepted by their office, including all circulations and any responses received from surrounding property owners and relevant utilities and other agencies that have an interest in any of the land that is a part of the road closure. So at this time, it would be staff's recommendation that second and third reading be granted to the bylaw, and we can finalize the process and have that land brought back into the private ownership of the property that it came out of as a part of the subdivision back in I believe it was 2018 or around there. And that's all I have on this item. I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you, Spencer. I'll open the floor to the council if there are any questions. Councillor Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Spencer. So when the rest of that area to the east of there is developed, were we anticipating the road to be pushed through at that time? Just as a reminder, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Councillor Holm, and through the chair to Councillor Holm. As of right now, there is an opportunity to create an access over the drainage ditch that's directly north of the existing approach to the individual acreage home. However, in the future, it's anticipated that a overlay for urban style development would occur, and we'd be able to identify exactly where a road right of way would be best suited at that time. So it really becomes a matter of moving the discussion and requirement for public roadway in that area down the road to a point where that landowner and the owner of the larger piece of land are able to sit down with the town and figure out what the best layout is in that regard.
Any other questions? If you're in agreement, then it would be appropriate to entertain second reading of the bylaw. Councillor Lloyd moves second reading of the bylaw. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Councillor Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Pauls, Holm, and myself. That's carried. And does anybody care to sponsor third and final reading? Councillor Pauls moves for third reading. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's carried unanimously. Councillor Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Pauls, Holm, and myself. Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you.
Okay, and then don't go too far away because I think you're up for item 9. Nope, I guess that's Kyle's turn now. 8.1. You have an intermission. Go ahead, Kyle. You can introduce the busing agreement.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So we have the in-town busing agreement between the town of Coaldale and Palliser School Division. The busing agreement covers students in Coaldale from kindergarten through grade 8 for Palliser School Division and Holy Spirit Catholic Schools. Essentially, those who live within 2.4 kilometers of their school in their house that are not eligible for the current busing grant from the Alberta government are eligible to purchase a bus pass through the town of Coaldale. couple changes in the agreement. So last year, the agreement only covered 110 passes. Palliser has increased this to 120 passes. Just another of note, last year total demand, including those on the waiting list, was 121. So we're moving closer to essentially fully covering everyone in town who has requested a bus pass in the future. Last year, the cost per bus pass was $255 per child. It's proposed in this agreement it increased by $5 to $260. This increase would create some consistency in the annual subsidy the town provides for this agreement, remaining at 30%, consistent with the previous year. Other than that being said, there is not anything of change from the previous years with this agreement. With that, I will leave it to council for any questions they may have on this.
Thank you, Kyle. Is there any questions of administration on this matter? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Kyle, and to Palliser for putting this together again. And it's been a really great job seeing this come together for the community. It's been a good program. My question to you, Kyle, is just the $260 covers the 10 months of the year. I'm just wondering if halfway through the year, whether there are people who drop off for whatever reason, change of domicile, or even change of school, or just maybe finding alternative means of transportation and don't need the full year. Have you found that to be the case in some circumstances, or are people utilizing the full year?
We have had a couple, like last year, there was a few people who purchased a bus pass and they ended up moving, so they requested a refund. That was kind of the first time we've seen this, or I've seen it in my time. We contacted Palliser and tried to see if we could sell the bus pass to someone else. It's fairly difficult to do that because Palliser creates their busing schedule based where everyone lives at the beginning of the year. So if somebody in Parkside has a bus pass and they sell, and then somebody else in Cottonwood is the next person on the list, it wouldn't work to sell that pass to somebody else because it won't work with the routes Palliser has identified. Because of that, it has created issues in the past. Administratively, we are planning on implementing kind of a policy this year is once you purchase a bus pass, it is non-refundable. That way the people know that up front, because we can't really resell a bus pass if somebody wants to only use it for 2 months of the year and then the town's out those funds. Logistically, it just doesn't work very well. But again, we saw it twice last year. Didn't see it any of the years prior to that I've been here.
Thank you, Worship. And Kyle, thank you. I guess what I was sort of going through in my mind, whether this might be something we could even look at by semester, such as what the college and universities do. But if this is a logistical issue with Palliser, I don't want to really create a bigger issue through this. However, it sounds like you've already had that experience, and so then Palliser still has to accommodate or adjust those changes where there's somebody that's dropping off or somebody that wants to be picked up, as long as it, our quota isn't overly affected. So I guess maybe it's just might be a conversation for the future where if somebody purchases a bus pass, whether they could relinquish it up and make arrangements with Palliser for either discontinuing service, for their child or creating service for another one.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if the town sells 120 passes and 2 months in from now, 10 people decide they no longer want that pass, it doesn't change any of the costs for the town. It's still billed at that 120 limit and the number of passes we've sold before. So any subsequent changes would be borne completely at the town of Coaldale. You know, we have tried to accommodate people in the past who have moved, and it turned out it has not worked well with the schedule that Palliser has identified. So it just makes it very tough administratively to do some type of, or any adjustments after the school year has started and Palliser has set their schedule.
Thank you.
Any additional, Councillor Home?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Kyle, and I don't know whether this question you can answer, whether this should be going directly to Palliser, but do I understand it from the write-up here, the busing is only eligible for kindergarten through grade 8. Is that because of the location of Kate Andrews High School, or is that because that is a policy for all schools that Palliser have?
I don't know exactly, but my if I was to take my best guess, it would be because Kate Andrews does offer grades 9 to 12. The scope of this is just to cover those not in high school. And if you offer it for grade 9, then you're having the busing service with the high school already. So I think they're making that cutoff where it's only for non-high school students. You do have St. Joe's that does have grade 9 there, but that might just be an unfortunate circumstance for those at grade 9 were St. Joe's.
Okay. And that's a Palliser policy, not the town of Coaldale, correct?
Correct, yeah, it's specifically in the agreement by Palliser that it's only up to grade 8. So that is 100% a Palliser decision.
Any additional questions? So we're looking for a motion to approve the busing agreement for 2021-2022. Councillor Chapman moves. Okay, is there any question? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's all unanimous. Councillor Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Pauls, Holm, and myself. Thank you, Kyle. And then we'll turn the meeting back over to Spencer Croyle with the development year in review and proposed process improvements.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'll have Cam Mills join me on this one as well. He's got a portion of this to speak to, and I know there's a lot to the report, so I'll just share my screen and bring up a presentation that should help move the discussion along. Okay. Now I just want to confirm, does everybody see the presentation slide itself or the presenter view on your side?
I see it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, well, we'll jump in then. So again, as you've already mentioned, Mayor, this is intended to provide an overview of the 2020 year in planning and development and a number of proposed enhancements focused on matters such as process, applications, and communication with all of the stakeholders involved in the development process. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide a snapshot of activity in the 2020 year, to present a new way of organizing and understanding development statistics, and to offer a number of suggestions for process and communication enhancements. The development statistics portion, this isn't intended to be fully readable per se, because there's a lot of information to fit on one screen, but really as a way of touching on the format that we've used for a number of years up to this point in time. So at this time, I'm going to let Cam speak to this, and Cam, I'll probably have to be your driver for the next couple of slides. So let me know when you'd like to move forward. Cam, are you there? We might just be having a moment of technical difficulties, Mayor, so maybe we'll just give Cam another moment to see if he can pop on.
Okay.
Okay, Cam, we've come to your portion. So I've got the current development statistics layout on the screen here, and whenever you're ready to move to the next screen, just let me know and we'll move on. We cannot hear you right now. Cam's just indicated he's having some audio problems. He's going to log off and log back on. So maybe what I'll do is move to the next portion and come back to this when he's able to overcome the technical issues. Okay. So the year in review in general included 137 development permits, 23 new homes started, which included 17 stick-built homes and 4 manufactured dwellings and 1 multi-unit build. 8 commercial industrial developments and 1 institutional development for a total of $10.6 million roughly. And we've also fielded an estimate of between 800 and 1,000 inquiries between phone calls, emails, and that's something that we do keep track of. From time to time, it can be difficult to note every call down or every email that's responded to. So this is approximately 800 that have been recorded. And then beyond that, it's just a factor of not being able to put pen to paper on every single one, but a fair number of inquiries are fielded throughout the year. Maybe before I move forward, I'll just make a note here quickly that these numbers are down from the previous year, and I believe the year before that as well, but 1 or 2 years doesn't necessarily indicate a trend, and it's something that over a 5-year average hopefully is more on a cyclical basis, and we can expect to see more consistent increases in these numbers over the short term as we move forward. So the first note that we'll touch on is processes and timelines. What I'll do is present the item itself and then the suggested process improvements that have been brought forward as proposals for Council's direction at this time. So as Council is likely aware, the MGA and subdivision and development regulations give us certain timelines that we have to work within for development processing. For permitted use development permits, we have 20 days to determine if an application is complete. Typically, it doesn't take anywhere near that amount of time to make that determination. And after that, the development authority has another 40 days to render a decision and issue the permit. For permitted use development permits, the goal in the department is to always be within 5 to 7 days from the date that we receive a completed application to the date that we're giving an application, or sorry, an approved permit back to an applicant. Over 2020, the average processing time has been plus or minus about 3 days, which I think the department and our team that makes up the department are proud of in terms of being able to provide that level of service. Of course, that's an average. There are some applications that take substantially longer and some that can be issued more quickly. Some applications do take longer because of things like missing information, incomplete applications, and complex aspects of an application related to servicing or site-specific components that have to be worked through. However, the goal is always to move forward as quickly as possible while maintaining a responsible approach to how effective we're being with our processes. For single detached dwellings, I just want to make a note on timelines briefly. For applications such as single detached dwellings, renovations, and simple accessory structures, all of these represent applications that are typically either quite easy to process, or in the matter of single detached dwellings, they're often in neighborhoods that already have approved servicing plans and things that help make the processing of those applications very effective and very efficient. For larger commercial and industrial developments, it's likely more reasonable that a timeline goal is 10 days. And this is to ensure servicing and infrastructure components can be thoroughly reviewed and approved by our infrastructure group as well as the planning and development team. So that's where we have quite a bit more collaboration and discussion among departments that have an eye on these applications. And again, this is also to account for the volume of applications that we expect to see based on continued interest in the industrial area and an expected increase in commercial development interest as well in the near future. These timelines represent a balance of efficiency and service that we need to be able to ensure development in Coaldale is being managed effectively and responsibly. So that's why I just wanted to highlight with the larger applications, 10 business days, I should probably clarify, is a more realistic goal. And that's just to give us the flexibility to ensure that we're being as responsible as we need to be in approving these applications. Applications take ideally a short period of time to prepare for and review and issue, and these developments are hopefully around for many decades. So we need to ensure that they're right on the front end so that they can be successful developments over time in the community. So when we look at the percentages of what makes up our total number of permits on a given year, in 2020 we had 137 total, and 119 of those were permitted use. So if we look at the average, it's just over 80% of all of our permits over a 5-year period are going to be permitted use applications, which is important to note because it has an impact on, or it provides context for how quickly our general permitting process can be, recognizing that discretionary use permits typically do take a little bit longer. So on the flip side of permitted use, we look at discretionary use development permits, and that does include permits that are would have otherwise been permitted, but may have a substantial waiver requested or something else that requires a waiver as compared to what the bylaw allows. And that would put some permitted use permits into the discretionary category. So we have the same number of days to determine completeness as we would with a permitted use permit, the same number of days to make a decision. For discretionary use permits, timelines are less clear in terms of start to finish from the date we receive an application to the date a decision is made, because MPC meetings are held once per month. So that does have an impact on how quick we can be. However, staff always looks for ways to ensure applications are processed and decided upon as efficiently as possible. One very brief example of that is if a mail-out timeline has been missed and it's an application in an area where hand delivery can be possible, then we'll make every effort to make sure that within the timelines we do have to circulate applications, the applicants and the surrounding property owners are aware of the application, and we can continue forward with getting decisions on these types of applications as efficiently as we can. So when we look at the number of discretionary permits, that's of course the inverse of the number of permitted use permits. And so by percentage, we're at about 16.8% over a 5-year average for the number of permits that make up our discretionary permits. And that would be about the same as what would go to the Planning Commission. So more specifically, thinking about what the anatomy of a discretionary use permit is, we have a larger, more contextual table for Council to review. I believe this was in the report as well, and it basically shows what the specific components of applications that have gone to the Planning Commission have been. In this case, we can look at the bottom third of the table showing the most common application going to the commission is yard waivers, followed by home occupation applications, signage waivers, whether that's the extension of a time limit for a temporary sign or an oversized sign or something of that nature. We also have applications for change of use, more yard waivers. Rear yard waivers appear to be less common than front and side. Fence and secondary suite waivers bring up the less common components of what we would consider in these types of applications. So where this leads us is we can look at a number of improvements that can be made to reduce the number of permits that are having to go to the Planning Commission, while still ensuring the intent and purpose of a discretionary use permit is upheld. So in this case, a couple of options for trying to increase efficiency while still upholding the need for discretionary use permit processes would be to split discretionary use lists in our land use districts into A and B. And what is meant by this in some other municipalities across the province, a discretionary A would be something that's still processed as a discretionary permit. So surrounding property owners are notified and feedback is received. And then if no potential negative feedback is received, a development officer can then issue the permit for that discretionary use. Discretionary B would be those uses that still have a potential for substantial impact to surrounding properties and would always go to the Planning Commission. So that's one option. Another option for increasing the efficiency of discretionary use permits is to broaden the development officer's authority to make decisions on pre-existing development requests for waiver requests for yard setbacks. And often those types of requests are tied to a sale process where home that's maybe in an older established neighborhood that's been built for many decades has a setback issue that had not been discovered until the time of the sale. And so that can be something that can help speed some of those processes up. We can also look at temporary sign time extension requests for community-based groups, such as the annual requests that the Copperheads put into the commission for their sign that's just west of the McDonald's. There's also an option to increase waiver powers from, just by way of example, 10 to 20% for certain aspects of developments, and to shift some home occupation to applications to the development officer's discretion. Again, within the context of all of these suggestions, one of the important components is to look to uphold the purpose and intent of discretionary uses, and the idea that for certain uses, there's always the potential for impact to surrounding properties that's substantial enough that it should still definitely go to the Planning Commission for consideration and a decision. In terms of processing proposals, one of the proposals that could be brought forward is to continue to refine the ability for applications to be submitted online. And this ties to the idea of being able to pay for applications online as well. Currently, that's where there's a bit of a gap. We can accept application paperwork online, but for payment, it's typically going to need to be made by either mailing a check into the office, dropping a check off, or paying by cash or a debit card. So staff between planning and development and finance have been investigating what it looks like to accept online credit card payments as a part of applications, and that work will continue to be done until there's a more refined proposal that can be brought forward to council, including a potential financial impact in that regard. One of the other components that staff wanted to bring to council's attention was the industrial landscaping requirements. So just very briefly, the current rules include things such as 10% of the lot or site area to be landscaped in the industrial area need to be landscaped, which can be substantial given the size of some of the lots and some of the developments that occur in our industrial area. We also have 1 tree per 65 square meters of landscaped area as another key rule, and 6.1 meters of landscaped area has to be provided in the frontage and any part of a lot that fronts onto a municipal roadway, starting at the property boundary and going back. And as per our bylaws, the applicants or the industrial developers also have the requirement to landscape the boulevards as well. So that can end up being a substantial amount of landscaping from back of curb into the properties that are developed for industrial purposes. We also require professional involvement, including a landscape architect or designer, and security for the construction equal to 50% of estimated construction value. Since 2013, it would be fair to say there has been some success with the above and some areas that could be improved. So again, given the size of some of the industrial lots being developed and some of the industrial developments occurring, 10% of a 5-acre lot can be substantial in terms of the amount of land that's going to be landscaped within and around that property, or a property of that size. Prior to 2019 and 2020, when a small change was made in terms of how much security could be taken, and I guess between the gap between 2013 when the new bylaw came into place and 2019-2020, security was set at $1,000. Some developers in the industrial area had historically chosen to forego that or forfeit that deposit and forego landscaping of any kind on their property. The rules can be prone to different interpretations and outcomes, and professional involvement has been a point of feedback for the planning and development team for some time now. So with a focus on the desired outcome, which the interpretation of staff is that landscaping of a consistent style and quality is the desired outcome to ensure professional appearance to the industrial area. So with that, the proposed changes for council's consideration would be requiring a minimum of 20 feet of landscaping from the back of curb into the front of the lots in the industrial area, including boulevard. And in partnership with landscape designer and local landscapers, there's also an opportunity to develop a limited number of options that show how boulevards and that frontage could be landscaped, whether it's a certain type of ground cover and a certain variety of trees that thrive in our local climate, and a certain type of irrigation design and topsoil depth and things of that nature. So those options could be provided as guidance to lot purchasers and developers to make the landscaping discussion as easy as possible. And the above could also be provided to local landscaping companies for costing estimates on an annual basis. So that would make the acquisition of security and the understanding of estimated costs as easy as possible as well. And within this context, it is proposed that security for landscaping be maintained at 50% of construction cost. Moving on to communication as a key component of one of the processes the department carries out on a daily basis. We do have many points of contact and opportunities for feedback daily with all stakeholders involved in the development process, whether that be lawyers, surveyors, appraisers, builders, investors, banks, or surrounding property owners. There can be benefit to formalizing feedback and these types of discussions to ensure continuous improvement is being practiced as much as possible. So a proposal in this regard would be to formalize those discussions a little bit more and have quarterly roundtable discussions facilitated by the planning and development team, and with invitations extended to those in the development industry that work regularly in the Coaldale area. This could provide an opportunity to touch base on anything that's come up as an urgent point for discussion, or any ways that we can help share and dialogue with each other in terms of how processes and all the related matters involved in planning and development can be handled in the best way possible moving forward. In terms of formal communications, Section 606 and 640 of the MGA address the need for certain processes for land use bylaw amendments and development permit processes. For example, notice of a public hearing has to be published for 2 consecutive weeks in a locally circulating newspaper, or mailed or delivered to residences in the area of a proposed bylaw change, or given by a method provided for in a bylaw as per Section 606.1. And Section 606.1 is the part of the MGA that gives municipalities the ability to pass an advertising bylaw that allows for things such as email circulations or circulation or notification by way of posting on the website. So the town has historically done the first 2 together, in that we typically for a public hearing will publish for 2 consecutive weeks in a newspaper and circulate to surrounding residents to make sure that there's as much coverage as possible with these notification requirements. And the proposal at this time would be that we draft an advertising bylaw to be reviewed by council, and not that that bylaw replace the idea of publishing in the newspaper and mailing or delivering to residences, but that it become another complement to those more conventional ways of advertising and notifying for things such as public hearings. So I'm now at the end of my portion of the discussion. I believe Cam's indicated his technical hiccup is solved. So I'm going to go back to the development statistics portion of the presentation and let him speak to the change that we'd like to make in that regard. Okay, so Cam, if you want to let me know when you're ready to move to the next slide, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That's a win. That's a win for Cam. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm just going to apologize in advance. I am fighting my first cold in a very, very long time. The upside of not going anywhere or doing anything, but it finally caught up with me. So if I cough a little bit, I do apologize. I'm just going to leave my video off, and then I'll turn my video on for the question and answer portion. So to start things out, what you see on this slide is the development statistics template that you've likely seen in the past. And we post this this type of information on our website annually. We have many years going back of this type of information. And this is derived from our development permit process. And that has a certain value. And it's something we're going to continue to post on an annual basis for our residents. Or other interested parties might want to know a little bit more about how Coaldale is growing. Now, all of this information has some value and some of it more than others. So what you see here and what we've done historically is really in line with how other municipalities communicate information to the residents. As we've discussed, we're also interested in going above and beyond what is standard. And for that reason, we think it's appropriate to provide maybe a broader cross-section of information to complement what's seen here, while also amalgamating some information that'll help maybe provide a clearer overall picture that can be a little bit lost when sort of an overly significant amount of detail is provided, which may be the case for some readers or some viewers of something like this. So Spencer, if you can pull me to the next slide, please. Wonderful, thank you. So the first three major changes, and by changes I mean additions really. So the first notable change is that we're going to move to posting building permit information rather than simply development permit information, which is an important distinction. Now, building permits are most usually pulled alongside development permits, though there are instances like major interior renovations where development permit is not required. One area where building permit data is certainly more valuable than development permit data is with respect to the valuations that are applied to each permit. The reality of valuations when they're applied to development permits is that they're often a bit of a rough guess. They might be, in some cases, low if the applicant might be afraid of tax implications, though it doesn't actually impact that. And realistically, staff don't have the time or the expertise to confirm valuations that are applied on a permit application. What's more, it really doesn't affect the permit process at all. So there's no reason for us to investigate a valuation provided. Building permits, on the other hand, tend to be far more accurate in terms of applying a valuation to a project. And in fact, building permit data is provided to Statistics Canada and forms the basis of their reporting on construction activity. Now, the town of Coaldale is not in the business of providing building permits. Instead, we use a contracted agency established through a competitive RFP process every few years. And we take a portion of the fees collected from that process. Superior Safety Codes is currently providing safety code services in the town, and we're happy to provide us with the information we needed for this report. Second notable change is we're going to look at presenting multi-year information rather than simply providing, say, 2020 data. Data for a single year provides little perspective. How is a reader to know if say, $10 million of residential construction is representative of significant growth if other years aren't available to provide a benchmark for that data? And along the same lines, in addition to Coaldale data, we've gathered data from two other similarly sized municipalities. So pulling from our municipal comparative analytics, we felt it was most appropriate to compare to two municipalities identified as the chief comparators for the town, which we identify as Tabor and Black Falls. Again, Tabor because they're in the same region, so how development is going in one would be reflected in terms of similar economic circumstances in the other. And Black Falls because they share a number of characteristics with Coaldale in terms of being an urban municipality in closest proximity to Red Deer. Now, Black Falls, by these metrics, is particularly interesting because they've really experienced explosive growth for several years. And in many cases, they're leading the province in terms of growth. And certainly that's the case in terms of towns and cities that aren't directly adjacent to Calgary and Edmonton. So they represent what you could call a high watermark in terms of growth potential for a town in a similar position to Coaldale's. So from there, let's take a look, Spencer, if you can pull the next one for me. So the data shown here, and I've simply provided it in graph form, but we would also post the raw data in table form to go along with it, is in a graph form because it provides a visual representation of the data. But what we have is Coaldale shown on the left. We have Tabor in the center and Black Falls to the right. And we're providing both residential and non-residential amalgamated building permit information for 3 years, 2018 in blue, 2019 in red, and 2020 in green. And this is in terms of the number of permits issued in those categories, not the values of the permits, but the numbers. And what does this tell us in terms of total permits? Well, Coaldale is clearly in the middle of the pack by this metric, with the caveat again that Black Falls is growing at what could reasonably be described as a breakneck pace. In all 3 years on the residential side, Coaldale significantly outpaces Tabor in terms of permits issued and lags behind Blackfalds. The gap between Tabor and Coaldale narrows significantly by this metric in 2020. And there are a number of likely explanations for this, including the propensity for modest renovation and outdoor improvement projects that took place during the sort of COVID spring or summer season. There's also the factor of lot availability, and we expect new build permits in Coaldale to be up in 2021 as the newest phase of Cottonwood in particular begins to take hold in the market. On the non-residential side, Coaldale again finds itself in the middle of the pack by this metric. And by non-residential, I'm amalgamating commercial and industrial information, because one of the things we do find when we look at building permit information is that the separation between those two is not necessarily perfectly accurate. And so it's better to just combine them. And realistically, from a tax perspective, they're combined anyway. So in this case, in 2020, Coaldale actually exceeds Blackfalds in terms of non-residential permits issued. You can pull the next one for me. And this slide provides, I would argue, more important data, as now we're looking at actual permit values, so the dollar value ascribed to permits delivered. And again, we would post this alongside a raw data table. What you're looking at here, or so when you're looking simply at the number of permits, consider that one permit is one permit, regardless of the scope of the work. So looking at values provides a better indication of the significance of development occurring in a municipality. And again, data is organized the same way, with Coaldale on the left, Tabor in the center, Blackfalds on the right. 3 years worth of data provided. We've added an additional column. So the purple column provides a 3-year average. And this is important because it helps provide some balance and some evening out when there's sort of one project of such a significant value that it skews an individual year's valuations, because these numbers tend to be quite a bit more volatile. Excuse me. So looking specifically at the 3-year average data, what we see is that Coaldale is developing very impressively. So the residential value of the 3-year average, while still below Blackfalds, is quite a bit closer to Blackfalds' level than it is to Tabor's level. And Tabor is by no means performing poorly here. So the non-residential values, the commercial and industrial, also show Coaldale trailing Blackfalds over that 3-year average period by about 25%. Blackfalds had a very significant 2019. But at the same metric, we're seeing about double the annual investment over that period occurring compared to Tabor over that 3-year period. So as mentioned previously, we really think that posting this information and this kind of information annually, along with the raw data that supports it, and then also providing those development statistics, gives a much more well-rounded, more comprehensive view of most of the questions people have when they're looking for this data, which is to say, how is Coaldale growing? Is Coaldale attracting investment? How does it look compared to its peers? This provides a more clear indication of the answers to those questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Cam. With that, I'm going to sneak back to the end of the presentation, and there's really no punchline. The outcome is, should council wish to direct staff to undertake all of the suggested changes, and if you have any other suggestions that you'd like us to work on, or if we're going to be directed to change scope in any way, that's all perfectly fine. One thing to remember is, with any of these items, if there's financial impact involved, we would bring back additional information to council after being given the go-ahead to refine the work a little bit and continue putting staff resources to some of these items, such as online payments and online application processes. Now, regarding some of the changes suggested through having to amend the land use bylaw, those all have, of course, their own process that would require first reading of a draft bylaw and then the public hearing that is typical of those types of things, and so on. So none of this represents an immediate change that would be made tomorrow, but more a request from staff to understand if we're heading down the right path, or if there's anything that council would like us to look at differently, or that we've missed, or that we should take off the table in terms of what it is that we would like to be able to action as we move forward to ensure our processes are efficient and effective. And with that, Mayor, I have no other comments, and Cam and myself are, of course, happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'll open the floor to questions of council. And I am not seeing everybody there. So my view doesn't, so if you want to speak to it, just chime in, or because I don't see the pictures for all members of council on my screen.
Mayor, would it be preferable if I stopped sharing my screen and then you could see everybody on your screen?
Sure, that'd be easier. I think Bill Chapman has a question as well. Okay, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. A question through to Spencer. I guess historically, we had addressed most of our matters through Old Madden Regional Services Commission. I imagine this is more of a testament to the business activity that's taking place within the town office here, and I commend you for all the work that you're doing. That would that be safe to say that that's really the case?
Certainly. So through the chair to Councillor Chapman, I might just ask for a little bit of clarity. Are you inquiring as to whether a lot of the new inquiries we've received are based on the idea that we've now taken over subdivision and similar types of processes?
Yeah, I guess that could be looked at from that way. And of course, you're trying to streamline an awful lot of the work that's being involved here. So that, in my estimation, is really a green light for us to move ahead. But really, in the old days, I guess that would have probably, you know, bottlenecked somewhere and slowed some of that process down.
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying now. Again, through the chair to Councillor Chapman, thank you for the clarity. I think that you're probably correct in some ways, and in other ways, it was just a matter of who was available to field certain inquiries, whether it was somebody with the commission office or somebody with the town office. But as we move forward, of course, that what you've mentioned would be the case, yes.
Just a further follow-up, in the past when landowners forewent their deposits, are you addressing that today as really setting the bar for what landscaping will look like in the industrial park?
Through the chair to Councillor Chapman, I think, if I understand your question correctly, I think the intent is to really streamline not only the process to get to properly landscaped lots, but also the intent behind the landscaping, recognizing that in some ways the current rules are substantial in terms of the cost and the amount of land that would be expected to be used for landscaping in an area that certainly benefits from landscaping, but the primary purpose is still for industrial development and activity.
Okay, any other members of council? Councillor Holm?
Your worship, just through to Spencer and or Cam, when you talked about moving the waivers from power from 10% to 20% on a measurable area, is that opening a door for us to really be beat up? Because we've, as Municipal Planning Commission, have been trying to be as solid as possible in the last, especially last year and a half, to not approve anything going over that 10%, so that we don't have a whole bunch of builders out there just building whatever they want and then coming in later and just asking for permission, rather asking for permission after the fact. And I just worry about going to that 20%, that we're going to have a lot of people that we've already denied that are going to be now wanting to come in and, I guess, take a shot at us.
Certainly, through the chair to Councillor Holm, and Cam, feel free to jump in after I've taken a crack at the initial response. But parameters can be put around the increase in waiver powers that staff would have, in the sense that it could be limited to existing developments where it's either a renovation or an addition that would be the question at hand, or only certain elements of measurable standards. So we'd likely want to avoid having an increase in waiver powers for the height of accessory structures, for instance. We could also avoid having additional waiver power for new builds. The one thing to highlight here is, regardless of how strict the Planning Commission has been over time, there's always going to be a desire for certain applicants to push the boundaries of what the rules allow. And in that sense, if we do have certain parameters around that, the expansion of those authorities, we could capture some of the more reasonable requests, you might say, that may be otherwise forwarded to the Planning Commission on a given month when those meetings are held. I don't know if you have anything in addition, Cam, but that would be my initial thoughts around the question. You're on mute, Cam.
I am crushing it from a technology perspective, folks. Something we talked about when we did our MPC debrief was we looked at some of these issues. When we looked at 2019, 2020, we saw 22 waiver requests go to MPC, of which 17 were approved and 5 were denied. We saw 35 discretionary permits go to MPC, of which 34 were approved and 1 was denied. With respect to the waivers, what we found was that so 77% of requests result in an approved permit. The denials, the four of them are variance requests where the request is for more than 50%. And 1 was a variance request of a minimum landscaping frontage. It was a duplex located near the town office. So what we're finding is that for folks that are asking for a modest increase in 10%, typically there's certain requirements that have to be met. And we can look back historically at those decisions and have an opportunity to make sure that's encapsulated in administration's decision. But the question is simply one of, if we've got something that results in a high frequency of a similar decision, it's a substantial increase in time and town resources to go that route. So from our perspective, it's worth considering, is this something that's better done at the much cheaper, much more efficient administrative level? But that's completely up to council.
If I may, Mayor, through to Councillor Holm, as a next step, would it be reasonable to put a little bit more into digging into some of the parameters that could be put around that as a part of a future discussion?
I think that'd be reasonable. Yeah, if you could. Thank you.
Well, you two gentlemen did a lot of work on this report, and I think it's a good reminder and a good start on how to make things more efficient and echo the fact that Coaldale's open for business. Councillor Lloyd has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. I share Councillor Holmes' concern. I feel that the bylaws are there for a reason, and I would really hesitate to extend that to more than 10%.
I think the intent would be for them to have a good analytical look at what's happening and whatnot. And like Spencer said, there are certain areas that would be off limit to them wanting to exercise that discretion, and some areas that might be. So I don't think we're giving them carte blanche to just go and all of a sudden increase their authority to allow 20% waivers on everything. I think they're going to be take a prudent look at everything and then bring back something to council that they can consider. This doesn't mean that council is approving a 10 to 20% waiver authority for the development department today. Just endorsing the direction that they're taking in simplifying and improving things. Hammond or Spencer, do you want to add to that or not?
No, if I may, Mayor, you had made a comment regarding the amount of work it took to put the report together, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Mel and Leah had a lot to do with the background to the report. So I certainly wouldn't want to be misunderstood as being the only author of this part of it. With Cam looking at the analytics, it was certainly a team effort.
That's good. Okay, thanks for the clarity. So I think I like the direction that you're taking with understanding that you're gonna need to have other nuanced approaches and change land use bylaws and there's other factors that have to come into play. So this, a motion to adopt your report as submitted here doesn't end the discussion for any member of council as things roll out type thing. So I like the direction you're taking on the statistical reporting and all that stuff. So, you know, I'm excited to see how those analytics can evolve and improve as well. So any other questions or comments of council? Okay, does anybody care to make a motion? Okay. Councillor Holm?
Yeah, that move that we direct the planning and development team to continue working and to bring back additional information on some of the statistics that they've talked about on what some of the new parameters might mean to their workload and to the municipal planning commission.
Okay, we have the motion. Is that kind of more or less along the lines of their recommendation, or do you want to vary it more along the lines of your wording?
I just want to ensure that we have some additional dialogue on this before we adopt it.
Okay. Is that, so we have a motion by Councillor Holm on the floor. Is there any discussion? I feel that that's probably in line with the intent that Spencer and Cam and Melanie had anyway, so it's not too divergent. I don't see any discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's all six. Councillor Pauls, Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Holm, and myself in favor. Thank you, gentlemen, and Melanie.
Thank you.
Then we have item 11.1, and did anybody want to speak to that on behalf of administration, or let the report speak for itself?
Mr. Mayor, through the council, I trust everyone's had an opportunity to review the materials provided, including the attachments that were submitted to council the day that they were received. We forwarded the documentation submitted by Mr. Schottmeyer to Source, the same consulting firm that worked on the wording of the signage, as well as the environmental design of the infrastructure. And we see this as a good opportunity to dialogue with a resident to monitor the growth in biodiversity over time in that stormwater complex. So our recommendation in response to this is not to do anything with the signs at this time, but instead recommend that council receive the correspondence for information and further direct administration to respond with a letter inviting the writer to collaborate with the town on tracking the growth in biodiversity in and around the stormwater infrastructure on the northwest side of Coaldale.
Okay. All right, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Speaking in favor of the motion, my question through to CAO Hastings, in light of that, in light of the motion, would it be appropriate to also ask if, just sort of thinking outside of the box, and the link pathway project that'll be upcoming, whether Mr. Schottmeyer might be interested in collaborating and identifying some appropriate biodiversity ideas along that pathway as well? It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the motion, but it can be a futuristic thought for him to consider.
Through the chair to Councillor Chapman, given that Mr. Schottmeyer wouldn't be paid for his time, I'd be a little bit concerned about scope creep. I think that the pragmatism in the recommendation that's put forward in this case, there's a convenience factor given the proximity of where he is relative to the infrastructure and the monitoring. I think we need to get our construction schedule finalized with the link pathway before over collaborating too prematurely.
Mm-hmm.
We're not designing the pathway in the same manner that phase 2A of the Malloy drain was constructed. A lot of the infrastructure there is managed by St. Mary's River Irrigation District, and as such, we haven't been given the authority to get into the aquatics or introduce species into their waterways. It's going to be quite minimalist asphalt pathway with some benches and some interpretive signage. At this stage, there's not going to be a whole lot of landscaping projects that help increase the biodiversity along the canal.
Fair enough. Thank you, Kaylin. That makes sense. I'll make that motion to receive this correspondence for information and direct administration to respond with a letter inviting the writer to collaborate with the town on tracking the growth in biodiversity in and around stormwater infrastructure in the northwest side of Coaldale.
Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Chapman. Is there any discussion? You see none? I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's all 6 of us, unanimous. Councillor Pauls, Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Holm, and myself are in favor. That's carried unanimously. And then we have 12.1 follow up to election inquiry. Lana, do you want to speak to this?
Sorry, Mayor. Yes, I had one item to add. I had reached out to Municipal Affairs at the time when I had compiled the report to get clarity if the rebate was going to be based on our current population or the eligible voters. Like there is a difference, our population of 8691 versus 6,300 of our eligible voters. And after I had compiled my report, I did receive confirmation back that it is based on our total population. So it would be 8691. That was all I had to add.
Are there any questions, Lana, on her report? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Through to Lana, thank you so much for your report. My understanding through the latest Mayor's Reeves meeting is that the Senate election most likely will be on the ballot for the coming election.
Well, thanks, Lana, for your follow-up to the inquiries from your report at the last council meeting. Thank you very much for that clarity. If there's no other questions through, Councillor Avery, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I'll make a motion to receive the updated information.
Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Avery to receive for information. Any discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Councillor Pauls, Avery, Lloyd, Chapman, Holm, and myself, all in favor. Thank you, Lana, for that.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we're at the end of our public session, so I'd have a motion to go to the closed session of the meeting. Councillor Holm moves us to the closed session. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Okay, that's carried unanimously, and thank you very much, and we'll leave this meeting and resume by teleconference then.